right. How y'all doing this morning? I was going to give a yeah, baby, when Aaron was singing in honor of Pastor Brian, how he used to all the time do. But I chose not to do that. We already got the picture for him. But I do appreciate y'all having me out today to include me in this series of Uncommon that we've been going through on living as what the Bible calls a royal priesthood and a holy nation in the kingdom of God. The focus today will be in the 5th chapter of Matthew, part of Jesus' longest, most detailed, most famous teaching, which we know as the Sermon on the Mount. Within the sermon, Jesus lays out essential principles for living a life as a follower, a disciple, a learner of His. We're in this Kingdom Living series, and we can say He's laying out essential principles for living as part of His kingdom, as representatives of His kingdom. While doing so, He repeatedly refers back to Old Testament laws with the intention not of abolishing them, not of expanding on them. Neither of those is what He's doing. He's actually countering the shallow interpretations of the law that were being taught and practiced by the Jewish religious leaders of His day, particularly the Sadducees and the Pharisees. See, to the Jews, both then and now, the law is seen as a bunch of commandments that are supposed to control you on the outside alone. But Jesus, on the other hand, is explaining that it's not just meant to do that. It was never meant to only do that alone, but to first change you on the inside, which will then naturally affect the outside as a result. So today we'll see Him continue His correction of shallow interpretations with the fuller, deeper, truer teaching on the topic of love in verses 38 through 48 of Matthew chapter 5. Oops, where are we going? We're on the grace giving. We done moved past that. Guys on the slides, there you go. Try the other direction, I got you. They don't know no more about this little clicker than I do, don't worry. That's right. Anyway, the verses will be on the screen for you, and you can follow along as we read them. Once again, we're going to be in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 5, verses 38 through 48. The Bible says this: "You have heard it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person, but whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you. And pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven, for He makes His sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward have you? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet your brethren only, what do you do more than others? Do not even the tax collectors do so? Therefore, you shall be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect." Before we dive into those verses and unpack the meaning of uncommon love, allow me to make an introductory point for us to remember as we do that. See, near the end of His Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says these words in Matthew 7:21 through 23. "Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness." He paints a picture here of those who seem to be doing all the right things in all the right ways. Certainly we would think these people will be favored by Jesus, right? Certainly we would think these people will be welcomed by him into his kingdom, right? Wrong. But they've called him Lord, Lord. They've prophesied in his name. They've cast out demons in his name. They've done many wonders in his name. Why on earth would they be rejected? Well, take a look at this. When searching for God's chosen leader of his people in Israel, the prophet Samuel was told, "Don't judge by his appearance or height, for I have rejected him." The Lord doesn't see things the way you see them. People judge by outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. See, these people in Matthew 7 looked godly. Sure they did. But God doesn't judge by outward appearances as people do. He saw behind their actions that they did good things not because it was the will of a God they truly loved and knew, but on account of unseen selfish motives. The Lord looks at the heart. The Lord looks at the heart. The Lord looks at, one more time, the Lord looks at the heart. And the heart here refers to the inner self. It's not the physical organ. It's not your ticker inside your chest. It's the mind, the soul, the will of a person. It's not just how you seem, but who you really are. It's not just what you do, but why you really do it. It's not just what you say, but what you really mean. And God, seeing our hearts, desires uncommon love toward him and others to be a hallmark of his people. In fact, remember, I just mentioned a few moments ago that the Sermon on the Mount is filled with corrections to shallow teachings of the religious leaders called Sadducees and Pharisees. Well, these groups continually tried to find fault with Jesus. And we see them try one more time to do that if we turn over to Matthew 22. See, Jesus shuts down the Pharisees or the Sadducees' arguments, and the Pharisees see that. They hear that he has silenced the Sadducees. So they huddle up and formulate a new question. And then, breaking the huddle, their quarterback, so to speak, approaches Jesus to test his defense one more time. "Teacher," he says, "which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And Jesus simply quotes Deuteronomy 6:5, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment." And he follows that by saying that the second most important commandment is Leviticus 19:18, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." Loving God with all you've got and loving others in the same way as you should love yourself is certainly not the common trend in this world, but it is clearly commanded by God. That means we don't get to choose. We are to practice uncommon love because it's the will of our Father in heaven. And with that said, keep these two things in mind now as we go back through our text in Matthew 5. God sees the heart, the whole self, and God desires uncommon love. Jesus is going to give two examples of the difference between the common ways of doing things, the norms in his culture and in many ways ours, versus the uncommon love that he desires for us. First up is Matthew 5:38 and 39. The norm is 5:38. "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." This is what's called the law of retaliation, which comes from the justice system that God established for the Israelites in Deuteronomy 19. That system can sound harsh to a lot of us today, but when we see it in the right context, it's actually a beautiful picture of God's fairness and grace. See, people have a tendency to get even and do it +1. We say, hit me once, I'll hit you twice. Or in other words, you gouge out one eye, I'll gouge out both of yours. You knock out one tooth, I'll knock out all of yours. All this causes, though, is escalation, excessiveness on our part until we've done something that is worse than what was done to us. And knowing that, God put this law into place so that His people wouldn't cross the line of violence and get even +1. It's not encouraging us to pay back. It's discouraging it in personal matters and setting limits for when it does need to happen, like in legal matters, to ensure that the punishment fits the crime. The uncommon love God desires goes deeper than simply taking the choice and the opportunity to refuse revenge on people that you would otherwise like to have it toward. His desire for uncommon love means leaving revenge all up to God, who promises to handle things in His way and settle them in His time. It calls us to trust Him to do that and leave revenge up to Him. Now, all this doesn't mean that we should be pacifists that literally stand by and let people slap us in the face. Pastor Mike learned that the other day. I walked up to him and slapped him in the face to see if he would follow this command, and he didn't. He didn't like it very much. If you go up too close to him, you'll see a little bit of a bruise on his cheek because, I've been hitting the gym more than him, but, Instead, this teaching is about showing injustice for what it is and then moving on without feeling the need to get even. Everything people did in Jesus' day was done with the right hand, so to slap someone on the right cheek would mean you were hitting them with the back of your hand, the way that you would hit a slave. Maybe you've watched a movie where maybe there's a slave owner and he walks up to this slave that is doing the work for him, and you always see them hit them like that, the back of their hand. And so it's not just a hit. It's a demeaning, a humiliating, a shameful hit because of the way that it's done. So to turn the other cheek, to turn the left cheek toward them is doing two things. For one, it's saying, hit me like I'm your equal, not like I'm your slave. But it's also refusing to hit them back and escalate the situation. It's showing the injustice for what it is, which is fine, but leaving revenge up to God. He's saying that the proper Christian response to insults or discrimination by evil people in a world that we know will sometimes hate us is to simply show it for what it is and move on without feeling the need for retaliation or resistance, as Jesus puts it here. Jesus expounds for us what this looks like in the next 3 verses. Oh, wrong way again, baby. Here we go. It says, if anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. These things aren't only indifferent reactions, they're intentionally loving reactions. Jesus is teaching that these situations can be used as opportunities for us to show uncommon love. If someone was to be sued for his tunic, his inner garment, the literal shirt off his back, which is once again a demeaning, a humiliating, a shameful thing for somebody to have done to them, he says instead of suing them back, just go ahead and give them the cloak, the outer garment as well, and say, there you go. I've got nothing left. I'm not going to retaliate. If a soldier forces you to carry his gear for 1 mile, as the Romans often did to the Jews, then instead of being angry and seeking revenge on that person, then instead of doing that, go ahead and carry it for 2 and say, you're not going to get me to retaliate. I'll actually do you one better than what you asked for. If someone begs for help from you or asks to borrow from you, then instead of turning them away and saying they should just go help themselves, Go ahead and give without expecting payment in return, not because you have to, but because you choose to. Don't forget that Jesus isn't in any way saying that we shouldn't stand up for ourselves when we need to, or that we should be soft, gullible pushovers, that we should be doormats. That's not what he's telling us to be. But all these examples do show that lovingly doing more than what's required and refusing it even puts you in control of the situation, and something that was meant to overcome you with evil can now be overcome with good. Jesus pits the common patterns of this world against his desire for uncommon love a second time in verses 43 and 44. He says, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.'" God had previously commanded Israel to love their neighbors, but he never said to hate their enemies. The religious leaders here, however, with shallow interpretations once again, had twisted love your neighbor into only love your literal neighbor. Jesus pulls the reins on that and says, no. Loving your neighbor means loving all people, even those who curse you, hate you, spitefully use you, and persecute you. Jesus' listeners lived with daily threats, but he wants them and us to see that while we might hate someone's actions, we must never lose sight of the fact that the person is a human image bearer of God, just like you and me. Just as Aaron alluded to when he was up here earlier, speaking of being able to see people as people. And those people that are attacking Israel right now, to see that they need Jesus too, that we shouldn't desire that they, as I was talking to someone just the other day, said, we should just hope that those people get wiped off the face of the earth. They said they deserve to be executed like a mangy dog because that's all them people in Hamas are. And I thought about that for a minute. And, my normal response would probably be more like, yeah, you're right. They're like a rabid dog. They deserve to just be shot. But God doesn't want us to feel that way about it. And as I had been studying for this sermon and then had that conversation, it led me to actually confront the person about that and say, yeah, I know we can't change them. I know I'm not going to change them. But I think that God can. I think that God can change those people. As much wicked stuff as they're doing over there, I saw a picture the other day of a car with two bodies in it that were nothing but skeletons because it had been burned. They had been burned alive in their car by Hamas because they were trying to flee. And people like that, yeah, we do often think of as rabid dogs that just deserve to be shot. But while what they do is hateful, and we should hate the action, we've got to keep it in our minds that those people are image bearers of God. And that you and I have done something just as bad as they have in our sin. Sin, it's sin. And we all deserve to be rejected. But in the same way that God hasn't rejected us for what we've done, we can't do the same thing to them for what they've done. Just as he's done before, Jesus expounds this idea for us in the 3 verses that follow. He says that you may be sons of your Father in heaven, for he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward have you? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet your brethren only, what do you do more than others? Do not even the tax collectors do so? Here Jesus gives us the reason for why we should do these things that we discussed in verses 39 through 42. That we may be sons of our Father in heaven. And what do sons do? They imitate their fathers. In this case, God, our Heavenly Father, cares for all people, making the sun shine and the rain fall on everyone, no matter who they are and no matter what they've done. He provides for us all, showing that no one is beyond His reach. And we should do the same. Instead of only loving those who love us, which even the tax collectors, the lowest in this society, do, we should be different and love even those who don't show love to us, which is what God does. Instead of only greeting people just like us, people within our families, within our churches, with love, which even the tax collectors, again, the lowest in this society of Jesus, do. We should be different and remove grudges and hostility from our hearts and love even the outsider, which is what God does. In this way, we will be examples of our Father, examples of our King, whose kingdom we belong to, and lead others to want a relationship with Him as their Father and their King as well. This is certainly not common emotional love and affection. This can only be uncommon love that requires us to look at people in a completely new light, that sets us apart from the norms of the world around us. It's something special, and something we'll be rewarded for. Loving people you don't necessarily like is hard, now unnatural, uncommon, but it's powerful when we do it as representatives of our God. One final verse, verse 48, is interestingly added here. It says, "Therefore you shall be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect." Well, I'm doomed. That's the end of the sermon. See ya. No. Before we take that as the conclusion of the matter, though, and walk away, let's take a more close look at what Jesus is saying here. To be clear, none of us is perfect like God, and we can't be. Trying to be perfect as God is like if I climbed up on the roof above me and bragged about being closer to the moon than the people down here on the floor. Sure, I'd be 50 feet higher than the rest, but the moon would still be an unattainable goal for me to ever actually reach, because 50 feet means nothing in the scope of 250,000 miles. And in the same way, thinking we can be perfect enough to get on God's level is just absolutely foolish. No one is deserving of Him. And it is only by His grace that He accepts us, loves us, welcomes outsiders like us. So why would He say be perfect? Now, what you have in your hands, of course, is a Bible, and it's likely in the English language. We all know, hopefully, that our text in Matthew 5 was not originally written in English. It was written in the Greek language. How many of you realize that? We realize it's not written in English. Jesus did not speak of the King James. He didn't. And so when we read this verse in its context, we see that perfect in 548 is the word in Greek, teleos, which means having reached its end, complete, perfect, holy. It's used to refer to something complete in its parts or something fully grown, particularly the completeness of Christian character. Even something holy, holy as in a royal priesthood and holy nation, just like we've been talking about over and over in this series. Jesus is saying that uncommon love is a necessary trait for anyone to be a mature Christian person, and a necessary trait for any congregation to be a mature Christian church. Full grown, complete, mature, fully developed. He's saying because you live this lifestyle that I'm teaching you, you'll be continually taking steps toward completeness, toward maturity as members of my kingdom. Do we want to be mature Christians, complete Christians, examples of the character of Christ, both personally and as a church? Then I must ask you all, individually and collectively, this question: how can you and we show uncommon love? Is it forgiving someone and leaving the revenge you want up to God? That's cut off, isn't it? I'll leave it right there. Is it doing more than you have to, just to show you care? Is it giving sacrificially to someone in need? Is it loving someone even though they don't love you? Doing good to someone even though they've been hateful toward you? Praying for someone even though they've done you wrong? Is it greeting the outsider, the person who's not just like you, with love? Is it displaying uncommon love even when it's hard and even to those you may not really like? Again, is it caring about the souls, not just of the people in Israel right now, but also of their attackers? Is being mature in your faith, being mature in the character of Jesus, being mature in uncommon love, more than caring about the person sitting beside you in church today, just as we often struggle to even do? But actually, just like I said, even those people over there, not seeing them as rabid dogs, but as people with souls that are going to go to hell when they die if someone doesn't share Jesus with them so that they can be saved like us. Maybe it's something else. It could be any number of things within your own family, your workplace, your community, even in our church. But think about it and take advantage of every opportunity you have to show uncommon love. When we do this, people will notice. As Jesus said himself, that the way in which people will know we are his disciples is that we have love for one another. And when they see that, they'll want to know what it is that sets us apart, opening the door for them to clearly understand what God and his people are all about. I encourage you to join me in praying daily for God to do just what David asked him to do when he said, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there is any grievous way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." A way that you might put that into your own words is, investigate my life, O God. Find out everything about me. Cross-examine me and test me. Get a clear picture of what I'm about. See for yourself whether I've done anything wrong. If there's anybody that I hate, if there's anybody that I want revenge on, if there's anybody that I don't care about in this room, in this community, in this country, in this world, and then guide me on the road to eternal life. And as you remember to do that, keep in mind, once again, that God sees the heart, the whole self, and God desires uncommon love. There's no way to hide what you feel inside from God. He sees your heart. And he desires to see uncommon love when he sees that heart. But there's one more important thing to remember, and it's actually the most important thing that I'll say to you this morning. It's that God not only wants us to show uncommon love toward him and toward others, he has also shown his uncommon love toward us. 1 John chapter 4, verses 8 through 10 say that if we know God and are following him, emulating him, then we'll show love because God literally is love. It's his very nature. And God manifested, revealed, showed his love toward us by sending his only Son, Jesus, into the world so that we, dead in the water compared to God's standard, could live through him. Love itself is encapsulated not in the fact that we deserved it, but that he did it anyway because he loved us. And the reason he sent Jesus to do that was so that he could give a perfect life so that we could never live. We could never live the perfect life that he did. And then he died as a sacrifice in our place, paying the penalty for our sin, which is death. Rise again on the third day, proving that he is indeed more powerful than sin, more powerful than the death it brings, more powerful than Satan, who it comes from, and then ascend to heaven to sit at the right hand of God as the Savior of all who will believe in him and choose to crown him king of their life, committing to learn from him and live for him until they pass from this life and spend eternity with him around the throne, praising God for the uncommon love that he showed toward us. you or anyone you know who has not accepted that offer of hope and grace given out of God's love can do that today. Those who don't will be rejected, just as we read at the beginning. Because the Lord looks at the heart and nothing else matters. If He doesn't know you and you don't know Him, which can only be the case when you place your faith in who He is and what He's uncommonly done. For those who have received that salvation, if He so loved us, we ought also to love one another. We love because He first loved us. If someone says, I love God, and yet he hates his brother or sister, he is a liar. For the one who does not love his brother and sister whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. And this commandment we have from Him, that the one who loves God must also love his brother and sister. If God forgave us for all the wrong we've done, if God did more than we could ever ask for and cared for us when He didn't have to, if God sacrificially gave His only Son for us, if God loved us when we didn't love Him, did good to us even though we'd been hateful toward Him, interceded for us even though we'd done Him wrong, if God treated us with love even when we were outsiders who were nothing like Him, if God displayed uncommon love even when it wasn't the easy thing to do and when we didn't meet His standard, and if God took every advantage to shower us with His uncommon love, then we should follow suit. Practicing uncommon love can't save your soul, but it should be a result of your soul's salvation. Our motivation for showing uncommon love is not a self-righteous attitude like that of the Pharisees of Jesus' day. Our motivation for showing uncommon love comes directly from our receiving His display of the same to us. And as members of a kingdom, we're obligated to serve our King in any way He asks, according to His will. He asks us to show uncommon love toward Him and toward others. So the only thing left to ask is something you'll have to answer for yourself. I can't answer it for you. I can't expound on it for you. I can't give you the key to it. What we know is that God sees the heart. And we know that He desires uncommon love. We know that He's shown His uncommon love toward us. And we know that the result of this should be that we show the same through our lives. So now the only thing left to ask, that question that you'll have to answer for yourself, is what I'll leave you with today. How will you respond? How will you respond to this message? Will you respond to it by heeding Jesus' command to love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love others as yourself? And will you respond to God's uncommon love that He's shown toward you by showing uncommon love toward others? Are you going to see people as image bearers of God today when you go out to lunch, when you go to Walmart, when you turn on the news? Or are you going to see people as rabid dogs who don't deserve God, who can't be changed, who are too far gone? They're not. God can reach them just like He reached you. And the only way that He's going to do that is by us showing uncommon love. Because how can they hear if no one tells them? And how can they believe if they don't hear? So if A plus B equals C, then how will they ever believe? How will they ever change if they don't hear from us and see from us something different than what they experience in their own circles, which are full of hate? Uncommon love. Show it today and practice it every single day in your life. It's time to go live that out. Please pray with me. Aaron's going to come up here and lead us in closing song.